Hey everyone, it's Ashley with Atlassian, and I am thrilled today to welcome Molly Hellerman, who is our Global Head of Innovation Programs here at Atlassian. We're going to talk a little bit about how to fill your team's tank and kind of how that gets away from some of the buzzwords around emotional intelligence. So Molly, it's great to have you here today.
Thank you so much.
So one of the things that we were actually just talking about before this call in terms of like filling someone's tank, what is it and why does it matter?
Sure, that's a really good question. It matters. I'll tell you what it is, but I'll tell you why it matters first. It matters because everyone has an emotional tank. It is something that is universal. It's not something that is just in the workplace setting. It's not just something that is all fluffy and doesn't have the science behind it. So it matters because each of us has a tank. Now, what is it? It's essentially like the pros and cons, the pluses and minuses that are happening in your day. And so if you think about yourself like a gas tank, or if you're charging with electric, sort of that electric charge bar, and every interaction that we have in our day either fills our tanks or it detracts from our tank. So for example, if you're having a really bad day and you feel like, the coffee was always cold and you couldn't quite get all the things to sync, and every time you'd sit down to work, you get 18 new messages flying in. Your tank may be, your tank may be, less full than someone who kind of can sit down, has found a way to carve out a good chunk of time to get some work done, is talking to the people that they need to talk to at the time, and they have a more full tank. And the tricky thing is about this is that everyone is coming to a conversation or coming to a meeting or coming to a moment with their tank in a certain place. And there's nothing that the recipient of that moment or that conversation can do about it, except to try and make sure that when they leave their presence, they're more full. So that's why it's kind of an exciting thing, is that we all have one and we all can actively work to fill tanks.
Yeah. What are some of the practical ways that you can kind of assess where people's, like what their fill level is? And especially now, as a lot of teams are working from home and they're, watching these things online, like, how do I know that, hey, maybe you're not in the best headspace to have this conversation, or actually maybe you're super excited and I need to get my energy up because otherwise I'm going to bring you down. How do you calibrate that?
Yeah, there's some tactical ways that we can kind of try and assess that, where in some of the meetings that I host, we all go around the horn and we say, where are we at on a scale of 1 to 10, sort of 10 being like, I cannot take another minute of anything and I just need to put my head down on the desk. And inverse, like 1 being that, and then 10 being like, oh, I'm like so excited and I can't wait to do more. Give me more. Yeah. And so the scale of 1 to 10 or 5 or whatever number you choose sometimes works. But I think the real thing is, and we say that we can look at people and say, oh, you don't look so well, or, you seem distracted. But the thing to really think about is we should always be filling tanks, right? We don't know where people are coming to us. We don't know how great they are at hiding what's happening. We don't know what the moment before our conversation looks like, or candidly, the moment after the conversation. And so one of the points that I draw out in the conversation for Summit is that we really want to choose to be tank fillers. And so if you take it from that perspective, there's lots of things that we can do to always be filling tanks. There's, praise and appreciation is one big bucket of things, where you comment on something that someone has done, saying, thanks for the comments on my blog, or if it's their birthday or their anniversary at work, celebrating that with them, asking about their kids, sort of recognition is another big bucket, saying thank you for things that they've done. As teams, we start meetings. Many of the meetings I'm on now start with high fives, whether it's a stand-up or a regular meeting, just sort of understanding where people are at. And then there's things where we can, we're listening. Basically, people, there's a lot going on right now. And so how do we listen to people and actively listen? We were talking before this call about turning off the notifications on any sort of messaging device that you have when you're having a conversation, just so you can be present. And then I think the fourth bucket, so if we have the praise and appreciation, the recognition, the listening, the fourth bucket would be nonverbals, which seems funny when we're remote, because a lot of times you think, oh, I'm right there, I can give you the high five, or we can go for a walk together. It still exists here. How do you smile at people? How do you recognize their contribution? Do you, post a little note to them? So there's lots of ways, and there's several tactics. I'm happy to talk more about them, but let me pause, because I know you have a whole agenda that you're trying to work through.
I know. Well, see, now I'm going away from the agenda because I'm at a 10. I'm excited about the conversation.
Okay.
Now I'm like,
10.
Hey, let's go off script.
I don't think I've had a 10 on any meeting. Mostly I'm getting like 7s and 8s. So that's
Just
great.
7s and 8. You know
I need
what?
more meetings with you.
High five over here. There we go. It's like a nice virtual. So most of what you said was kind of a positive, tank filling in terms of praise, recognition, active listening, and attention. I would actually posit that there's another form, which is like on the feedback mechanism, right? So it's actually not helpful to me all the time for somebody to just tell me that I'm awesome. Sometimes I need them to give me constructive feedback. So what would you say in terms of like, how do you not just make this about being nice or being a pushover, but actually helping people to grow and be the best version of themselves? Because I think that's what this is really about. It's not just being nice. It's about helping people grow, right?
Yeah. And I want to be really clear that it's not all the research that's out there is not necessarily just about being nice, right?
Yeah.
I can say like, oh, Molly, you look great today. Or I really like your Zoom background. Like that is better, right? So now I know, oh, you like my Zoom background, but if you're like, Molly, it looks like you have ears of corn coming out of your shoulder.
Yeah.
Like that's some constructive feedback. But the important thing is that it's truthful and specific when you're giving those positives.
Yep.
And if it's not truthful and specific, we all know we can call BS on someone if they're just kind of making something up. And so if you can't be truthful and specific, then I would wait, and try and find those moments or be the listener, right? If you don't have anything to say, to be the listener. But when you think about, to get to your point around sort of how do we get that criticisms or how do we get the correction, I think asking for it is one of the ways that we can do it. When in the conversation that we have as part of the summit talk, is choosing your words is really important. Yeah. And so, for example, let's say you've written a blog and I think that you haven't done a great job of humanizing it, which you wouldn't have. But let's say there's a way that especially in these times when we have so many things that we're trying to get through, it could be a little bit more humanized. I could say, listen, Ashley, I think you think about who's reading this. Can you put that in there a little bit more? And that's one way to give you feedback. Yeah. But another way to give you feedback that is still the positive is to say, hey, I was reading this, and I think if you were to put a little bit more of the tone of, Luis, and think, how would Luis take this in? Then I think he might receive it better. So it's a word choice, right? There's an if then word choice. Another one is, like I said, to ask permission. Like if you have feedback to give someone, ask that permission first, because they may or may not be in a place to receive it. And that gets to, how do we tell where people are at? Yeah. So let's say I say, hey, Ashley, I think this is a way that, I have some suggestions on your blog. Are you open to them? If you say yes, then I can launch into them, because that means your tank is at a place to receive this information. Yeah. Versus if you say, no, can you write it down or send it to me later? Then that's telling me now is not the moment. And this was research that was even done with elementary students. Oh, interesting. Yep. And when kids didn't get to a specific ratio of positive to negatives, they were unable to take in information from the teacher, just unable to understand anything that the teacher was giving to them. I think another tactic is to ask for input, right? So you ask if you want the input, or as I have things, to ask you for your input. And then that opens the conversation in a two-way door, so that when you feel ready or when you want that feedback. But a lot of it is creating a fundamental baseline where you have a full tank, so that when you're giving those criticisms or we're giving those corrections, it doesn't seem like, God, this person's really just tearing me down. Yeah. Yeah. One thing, that's pretty easy whenever we do things one-to-one, right? You and I work together now fairly frequently. And so we're starting to be able to read each other and starting to have that trust in that relationship. But how does that work whenever you're trying to scale this across an organization, or you're a leader that now maybe has a team of 10 or 20 or 30 people, where it's really hard to build that one-on-one trust? How do you make sure that you're building that kind of baseline full tank, so that when they interact with you, they know that you're coming from a place of trust, you're coming from a place of support, and building them up, whether you're giving them criticisms or giving praise, so that comes across as authentic and helpful? How do you do that at scale? Yeah, I think there's two ways. I mean, there's multiple ways, but two ways that I'd like to call to look at this. As a leader that maybe has a larger team, or if you're working with a larger team, regardless of whether you're the leader, I think there's the link between what you espouse and what you enact, right? So if I am saying, hey, it's important that we all work together and that we listen to each other, but then I don't do that, that doesn't create the space for it to happen on our call. So so being really clear up front as a leader, as an organization, or as part of a team, how do we want to treat each other? How are we going to run these calls? Who is going to moderate them? What does that look like? How do we include each other? Is it something where we have around the horn? Is it something where we raise our hand in Zoom or whatever we're using on the actual sort of on the chat? Is it something where we raise our hand up in the air? What does that look like? And sort of setting those ground rules and then being able to iterate and change those as the team grows and learns more about each other. So I think that that's one piece of it, is thinking about what you value, saying it, and then enacting it. On a more tactical day-to-day level, I do think there is a lot of value in trying to form smaller cohorts. So while an individual can't meet individually with all, 1,200, 5,000 people in their company, you can still have smaller groups. So we have a bunch of different things that we're trying here at Atlassian, whether it's circles groups, or I just read about a team which is doing a Mr. Rogers Day, where they basically put people every week in a group of 3, and that's their neighbors for the day, really cool, or for the week. And then they are responsible, those 3, for getting together and then spending 15 minutes together doing something. It could be checkers, it could be telling jokes, it could be having a coffee, whatever it is. And then that's in a Trello board. And then they report back in their card what they did. And it's a simple feedback. We played checkers and Ashley won. So I think there's a lot of things that we should think about as leaders and as teammates about how can I connect with individuals. And then as we start to do that, I do think it has an amplification effect that will scale for a company.
Yeah, that's awesome. What do you hope that people walk away from your session? Is it practical advice? Is it just feeling empowered? Is it leaving with their tanks full? Is it all of those? What can people expect from your session at Virtual Summit?
Yeah, I thank you for asking that. Because I spent a lot of time thinking about this and putting it into the presentation. First, I hope that they're entertained and hear some good stories. Second, I hope that they understand that a lot of this is research based. Every piece of this that we have has hard research as part of it, and books and things that people can read to learn more. I actually have 5 takeaways. So as you know, when you are watching this, or if you choose to watch it, you can sort of work your way through those 5 takeaways and learn a couple of things. And then I think the big thing that I'd love for people to walk away saying is that, hey, this is something that I could do. I can do this right now. When I turn off this computer, if my kid is the one standing beside me, or I'm taking care of my parents, or I have a meeting coming up next, I can start. There are some tools and tactics that I can use immediately to fill my team's tanks.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Molly, thank you so much. This has been a fun conversation. And everyone else, make sure you go to atlassian.com/summit to hear more from Molly and other great speakers.
Thank you.